Pam Schaefer. I'm an attorney with Midwest Environmental Advocates. For many years, I practiced with big law firms representing big companies, and then I had a change of heart, and I've joined your side. So I'm more than happy to be here. What I'm supposed to be talking about today is kind of tools to use in what I call the frac sand wars. And there's lots of them out there, so I'm just going to kind of run through some things. And then I also want to talk a little bit about a couple of things that are not on the agenda. Yeah, but I'm good at talking over loud noises. So the first, let me just get my little agenda for myself. The first thing I want to talk about, I touched on a little bit this morning, is annexation. Are any of you living in communities where annexation has started to happen or has happened already?
Considered.
Okay. Where? Yeah.
I don't live there, but I live real close to Glenwood City, which is in St. Croix County, and the St. Croix County line.
Okay.
Eastern part of St. Croix County.
Okay. Well, annexation is, as you know, I think you said you were an attorney?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is a statutory process and a relatively complicated one. And again, I'll harken back to what's going on in Trumbull County. Because the county had a very good mining ordinance, the mines have started to go to the communities and say, well, just annex us and then you can regulate us. And the towns and the cities are not really prepared to do that very well. So as they go through the statutory process, and I'm sure I don't have the statute number, but it's basically a process of deciding what you have to annex, and it's usually a certain number of lots. The one that was happening in the town of Independence was interesting because the city of Independence, picture this in your mind, was up here and the mine was down here. So what they were going to do was to annex a little daisy chain of properties to get to the mine, which you can legally do, but it created an interesting question as to whether all those property owners would go along, and they were offering them big sums of money to go along. So the annexation process is interesting, not so much because of how it's done legally, but because of the politics of it. Once that was happening and it didn't look like it was going to work, then the city of Whitehall, which is near the same mining area, decided, well, we'll try to annex it. So they had a hearing, I think it was a couple of days ago, to talk about their new mining ordinance, which is interesting because the ordinance itself is very well worded. It looks like it has a lot of legal protections. It has decibel levels of 80, which should be like 40, 45. Does have some interesting language about compensation to landowners. But more importantly, it has a little section that's buried in it that says that if the city decides to do a mining agreement where the mine and their lawyer, that same Oak Fair law firm, sits down with the city and their lawyer, who's from the same law firm, and they sign an agreement and the council accepts it, then none of those protections apply. The hearing, several of the people that I've been working with stood up and said that, and there was a big gasp, and including a gasp from the people in the city council who didn't realize that was in there. So it's interesting what's going on in terms of annexation, and because what happens if the city wants to annex a mine, is they then have to have the legal underpinnings to manage it, which means they have to have a mining ordinance and probably a reclamation ordinance. I talked about this morning on the reclamation ordinance is essentially the state law requires that if you're going to do non-metallic mining, you have to have a reclamation plan in place, and the state requires that. And then it's generally enforced in Wisconsin by the county. And so in Trumbull County, part of the reason the mines were mad at the county was Trumbull was really actually enforcing it and requiring significant bonding so that if they didn't do it, the county would have the money to do it. So the city of Blair was approached by the Preferred Sands mine with that, well, why don't you annex us and then you can reduce our bond? So there's lots of things going on like that that are political and not good, but not necessarily illegal. It's difficult to take a legal handle on those things. So the significance of annexation, from what I'm seeing, is that it's being used as a tool by the mine to escape regulation. Now, there's one little footnote I want to say to that, because until you read NR 135, and NR stands for Natural Resources, 135 is the number, that's part of the Wisconsin Administrative Code. So if you Google Wisconsin Administrative Code 135, it will come up. And there's a little section buried in the back that basically says that if a municipality takes on the job of managing reclamation and doesn't do it consistent with a good, well-drafted ordinance, the state can hold a hearing and then give management of reclamation back to the county, which in our situation would be a good thing. So I've raised that with a couple of people, including the county, and they were sort of amused to know that that was true. No one had read the whole law, and they found that, and they went, oh, this is a good thing. When I mentioned it to the city of Blair, I got a bunch of blank stares, because they had no idea that that was the case. So that's kind of, from my standpoint, what annexation is all about. It's really about ways of the mining companies to try to manipulate the system. I talked a little bit about NR 135. Reclamation plans generally have to set forth what you're going to do to reclaim the land, and unfortunately it's not reconstructing. You can't put the hill back where it was. You're just basically now taking a flat area and trying to turn it into something. And some of the risks of reclamation have to do with the fact that many of these mines are planning on using their waste to fill in the hole. And I went to a seminar maybe a month or so ago in which the woman from the DNR who's in charge of reclamation spoke. And I went up to her afterwards and said, excuse me, I'm a little confused. When you put waste in a hole, aren't you creating a landfill? Don't these have to be licensed as landfills? She gave me this, oh, I've never heard of that before. Well, it's another example of some creative thinking that is a way to attack what's happening here, because if they're putting waste in the ground without a landfill license, that's illegal.
What kind of waste?
Well, what they do is they have waste sand that has come back. In some cases, preferred sand has loads of sand coming back that have been rejected. They put it back in a stockpile and push it in the hole. Sometimes it's sand that has been laced with, I can't remember the name of the chemical ones. Yeah, you're good. In which case, it's basically a waste product because it has a chemical in it. And so that's what's going on.
Just quickly, do you have a site reference to the landfill license requirement?
Landfill licensing, I believe, is governed under NR 500. Although I haven't checked it recently, so they may have been renumbered. But generally, if you look through that, if you go to Wisconsin Administrative Code, kind of cruise through the index, you'll see there's landfill licensing listed. I'm pretty sure it's NR 500. So I guess I was saying is as I'm talking here, I want you to understand there are tools out there to deal with some of these issues, and the DNR doesn't really know what they're doing on the reclamation end. The thing I noticed that was most interesting to me when I attended that seminar, it was being hosted by the Federation of Environmental Technologists, which is basically a group of engineers and people that do science for all kinds of different things. There would be air engineers and other engineers there. There were also speakers there from the DNR, including the lady from reclamation. And there were people there from several mines, including the Superior and Silica Sands, who was giving the pitch that they are a good leader and look at all the wonderful things they're doing. But it's pretty clear that many of the DNR people were also taking their clues from the sand mines, that they were not independently thinking about what they should be doing. And the woman from the reclamation section, I'm sorry, I don't remember her name.
Ann Copley?
I'm not sure, I don't remember. I just remember being appalled at her lack of knowledge. And her unwillingness to even listen to that argument that that's an illegal one. But that's a topic that will come up 20 years from now when the reclamation is being done. So the next thing I wanted to touch on basically is air permitting. I did talk about that a little bit this morning. Each one of these mines has both a wastewater discharge permit, and they also have an air permit, both of which are issued by the DNR. And some of the things that were talked about this morning about sand being discharged from some of these mines would be under the stormwater permit. And that particular permit has been violated by the preferred sands mine, which is the one that was annexed by Blair. They actually had an incident about a year ago where a huge amount of sand blew into a house, blew the house away. But the fellow was not interested in pursuing litigation, so the mine just bought him out and that went away. But the matter was referred to the Department of Justice in June of last year. And as of the last time I checked, which was a month or so ago, they still had not issued the complaint they drafted. My guess is that they're being told not to issue it, because I've talked to other people in the last couple of days who say they have photos of ongoing discharges of sand from that mine. So one of the things that NBA is going to be doing is, once again, gathering evidence. We need those photos, and we're going to get the photos, and we're going to be going back to the Justice Department. But what about this? So that's on the stormwater side. And the reason that's significant is the sand that's blowing across the road is ending up in creeks, which are traveling into the rivers, and that's not permitted under the permit. On the air side, when MEA decided to start getting involved in this, we kind of picked Trumbull County because there's only one of me, and I'm the only one there who's really working on this, along with Sarah Williams, kind of part-time. So I said the only way I thought I could be effective was to pick one county that's been heavily impacted, and I'll still take calls from other people, but I'm trying to focus there because I've been able to learn the politics of other people, and I think I can accomplish more of that, right? So, and Trumbull County has something like 25 of the permitted mines, so they have a pretty high percentage of them. So anyway, the air permit is issued by the DNR. It kind of happens in phases. They issue a draft permit, and what we've been doing on at least 2 or 3 of these as they've come out is to do a comment on the permit that's a scientific comment. It goes into a great deal of detail on why the permit's not adequate. Criticizes where they have wrong air pollution control devices, where they don't monitor for the right standards, where they don't require the dust that's being emitted to be controlled appropriately. One of the problems with the dust control requirement is that in Wisconsin, the dust control part of the permit basically says that you will keep the dust down by spraying it and doing other appropriate things. But the problem is that the records that they're doing that are not public records, they're maintained on site. And so the DNR can come to a mine and say, hey, we want to see your records for June 30th, but a citizen can't get those records without going through the DNR. And so I've also heard from someone this morning that they had photos, actual photos of the dust coming off of the mine. I'm not sure which mine, but it wasn't Trumbull County. And they could match those to the dust records that the DNR got for them from that mine. And the dust record shows, well, we were watering everything. Well, that's not possible with the amount of dust that was blowing over there. So there's clearly some disconnect between the records that are being kept and what's really happening. We met with the DNR on one of these mines. It was the FDS International that's being proposed for Arcadia a couple weeks ago. And several of the DNR people there, when they saw photos that we did have, want some more, said, whoa, this is really bad. You can see there's dust everywhere. That shouldn't be happening. That's a violation. Unfortunately, the person who took the photos could only tell me, well, I think it was sometime in March. So that's the reason for the form, is we want to have where you were standing, what you saw, all this recorded on the form, so that when we say we've got violations, we can haul out the form and say, here, this is what's going on.
Where's that form available?
Well, it's going to be up on our website next week. Yeah, and it's Midwest Environmental Advocates. I think it's under Midwest Advocates. So if you go out to the MEA's booth and just sign up, you can get a copy. Just put down your email address. So my pitch here is, help us acquire that kind of evidence because we can use that evidence. So anyway, that's what's happening on the air side. And the other big issue is the PM 2.5 monitoring. Right now, DNR, by our view, is required to do that by the law, but they have been usually just allowing the mines to either monitor for much larger particles like PM10, or they have not required that they monitor it on a regular basis. And if they do require it on a regular basis, they usually say, well, okay, you can monitor it every 6th day. Well, that means on the 6th day, they'll probably ratchet back to like 25% of the production, so they'll pass. we want them to monitor at least twice a week, and we want to know what the capacity was that they were operating on that day. So if they are ratcheting it back, we can say, well, that wasn't at full capacity. Well, the DNR's response is, well, but the law says it has to be at full capacity. Well, the permit doesn't. So those are the kinds of things that kinds of details that we're trying to get to with the DNR to try to be more protective. Now that, you can't stop a mine from getting a permit, but you can try to make it more useful, and that's our goal. And so far we've only engaged them on 2 or 3 of these, so I don't really have a track record to talk about, but we're hoping that as we begin to push these issues, we'll see that the DNR will begin to recognize some of those and recognize that they're going to keep doing this until they change their policy internally. It was actually not that bad a meeting. I thought they would be very hostile, but they actually took that to heart, and we'll see. I haven't heard back from them yet, but maybe we're making some progress. I think I only have like 7 minutes left. Yeah, I'll try to wrap up here. A couple other tools. I know that Mr. Quackenbush is here from the Ho-Chunk tribe. I'm hoping to engage with him in the next session. There you are. Okay. Did I murder your name?
No, actually.
Pretty good. Okay. And part of it, I'm going to talk about why we're interested. There is a new mine that's being proposed in Trumbull County. This is the one that the city of Whitehall and the town of Independence are fighting over possession of. And there's a farmer who owns land immediately adjacent to that mine. And there is evidence of an old quarry that looks like it may date back to the tribal times. And there's also evidence of flints and other things, stone tools kind of thing in that area. So I'm hoping to have a conversation with him about how we might use that. So I mention that only because it's kind of like having a toolkit of what you can do to try to stop them, or what you can do to try to modify the permit. And there's lots of things out there. There's also moratoriums. That was one of the things I was supposed to talk about in detail. I'm not sure I'm going to have a chance to get to the big detail. There's 2 different ways to do a moratorium. There's a statute that governs it. Let me see if I can find it. It's 66.1002. This is a statute that has a very specific set of procedures for a town or municipality that wants to do a moratorium. But all municipalities, cities, and counties have broad powers. They have broad powers to protect the public and things like that. So many of the people that have brought moratoriums have brought them as citizens, bringing it to the county and saying we want a moratorium. And in some places they've been successful, in other places not. The one that was proposed for Trumbull just failed a couple nights ago. But the moratorium is powerful. Unfortunately, it's only for a limited period of time. And
What's the best way, Pam, to use a moratorium, and what can you put in place, hopefully?
Well, what we were suggesting to Trumbull County was that they use a year or so that they were gaining to study the cumulative impacts. And so we were pitching it as a chance to look at the 25 mines and how that's impacting not only the air, the water, and the aesthetics because of the fact that they chop off the top of the hills. So basically you have to have something that you're studying during that time period. The other thing would be there's district zoning that is being proposed, and I think I can't remember the name of the moderator from the last section talked about overlay zoning, so there are some zoning possibilities as well. And I'm not an expert on zoning, but I think if you have something that's specific, the overlay zoning would be good because you then have restricted mining to a certain area, and you could control some of the things that are going on where they're popping up everywhere.
Can we do anything in Wisconsin like they've done in Minnesota where they banned the chemicals being used or just banned it completely?
I think it would be very difficult to ban frac sand mining completely, but you probably could put some control on the chemicals. The difference between Wisconsin and Minnesota is Wisconsin's legislature is not helpful at this point. I won't betray my politics here, but they would never pass something like that. And that's why my final words are always run for office, because we got to get it back. We got to get our cities, counties, and legislature back if we want to move forward. Okay.
What do you know about federal preemption? I live in Waukesha, and they're gonna bring 280 trucks in, 280 trucks out with sand from Buffalo County.
In Waukesha?
In Waukesha, Minnesota. They're already building the rail spur. All they have to do now is do the 8 silos. They wanted 4, Superior Sands did, but the city gave them 8.
Okay,
So they don't.
what's the name of the city? Waukesha, you said?
Waukesha.
Waukesha, okay, I thought you were saying Waukesha. Well, I have to confess that I've just begun to research this issue. There's a very good law review article, and if you send me an email, I'll tell you where it is. And basically, the basic law is that in 1995, the Interstate Commerce Commission was replaced by the Surface Transportation Board. And for the most part, anything having to do with the operation of railroads preempts any effort on the local or state government to try to regulate it. Now, where it becomes an opportunity is that the case law that is developed, and that's how a law develops as people bring cases, seems to differentiate between a spur, railroad spur, and a railroad sideline. I can't remember the name. And there also appears to be a difference between handling of hazardous waste versus handling of a solid waste. So, and in my reading of that law review, it looks to me like there may be some opportunities to argue that, in fact, local siting in this situation is not preempted. But we haven't advanced our research yet far enough to be able to say. I'm just saying that wherever there's a problem in a law, there's an opportunity to challenge that law and to see if you can get some refinement that will help you. The other possibility on the railroad situation would be, because there was a refinement of that law that was passed in 2009 or 2008. I can't remember what it's called. It was one of the goofy names out of the law. But it was passed under the Bush era, which was a surprise to me. And they were able to differentiate some of the things to give back some local control. And so I think there may be an opportunity, if you argue it from a local control standpoint, to do something on the legislative side at the federal level. And that, I don't know yet. We haven't gotten that far in our thought process, but that might be the way to go, is to try to change the law. And because it's a local control issue, that might be an issue that would cross political lines. So, that would be the approach we might take. But I can't make any promises because I haven't gotten that far in my thinking process, but I think that's an option. So, I guess the difficulty is with yours is that they're so far along, it would be difficult. But again, if you drafted the law correctly, it might also apply to ongoing operations. So you have to be consistent about how you do it. I guess I'm just at 1:30, so let me just cruise through here real quick. I talked about reclamation, stormwater permits. I do want to recommend to you reading the Cooks Valley Non-Metallic Mining Ordinance, COOKS, and hopefully we have this wonderful document that we haven't issued yet called the Frac Sand Toolkit, and it has all kinds of wonderful things, including a citation to that ordinance. So if you want to email me, I'll get you the citation to it. And hopefully we'll get the toolkit out relatively soon. I don't want to go beyond my time, and I think I've covered everything that I said I would cover. And I think I did talk about the incident violation form, and we've got a place to sign up if you want to get that. We're hoping to have that on our website next week, and we can start collecting those. Any other questions? You had a question and I didn't answer it.
Why does the frac sand mine tries to annex a property like a building?
Well, it wouldn't. The mine wouldn't have. We asked whether or not a frac sand mine could annex a building. They could buy a building, but only a town or a city has the power to annex something, and the mine isn't a town or a city. But if they wanted to buy something, they'd have to pay for it, and the mines have a lot of money, and so that's what they've been doing, is buying things.
Considering in Trumbull County by Arcadia, when you were talking about the air quality, have you had a chance to talk to Paul Laney?
Yeah, actually, MEA is representing Paul Laney and a group of people against the proposed mine, and they're looking for additional people to join their group. So do you know Paul Lanny well enough to make contact with him?
Yeah,
Yeah, I would, if you're interested in finding out, we'll just call him directly.
it's about 5 miles.
Just wanted to announce it's time's up,
Yep.
finish up, whatever.
I think.